for me as a lawyer, I kind of, apart from the traditional and the generative AI, I look at AI used in the creative process and AI looked at from a kind of data training or catalog training perspective.
Charlotte, you are working day-to-day basis on advising producers, but also producers, organizations, and festivals on, I guess, on how to use those technologies sound and safely, as well as what the paradigms are. Roughly speaking, we see two different schools now emerging. I guess one in US and one in Europe. What are the kind of traffic lights and warning lights or disclaimers that people should be aware when going out with those tools?
Many thanks, and as you can all see, when we divided the roles on the panels, I got the old school, Charlotte, bring your handwritten manuscript, no AI involved, but I thought as the lawyer, there's no way I can...
You want me to put it into into a co-pilot now?
There is no way I can put any kind of lawyer's presentation together that can compete with this. So you'll just look at me and listen to me, and that will all be fine. Sten actually asked me when we prepped, he asked me a question, how is AI shaping your work today? What's the difference? And for me, it's a bit like an unruly child that demands a lot of attention, not always for the right reasons, sometimes very exciting, and sometimes you want to say, we just step on the brake a little bit. But I think it's super useful for all of us to remind ourselves that we're at a film market, and in here people are trying to make their dreams come true, trying to raise money to develop and to produce and get distributed and so on. That's already a massive challenge, creatively, commercially, legally, and you can add AI to that equation. That doesn't change much. So I think for me, it's all about how we can make it into a good tool, how we can find a way to enhance processes and nourish creativity. So I'll try and do a little bit of myth busting and fear busting, and just maybe give some practical insights into things to keep in mind when you're working with it. And this is the lawyer talking tech, so disclaimer. But generally speaking, I like to look at two different types of AI. The traditional, the kind of pattern recognition, problem solving, decision making, predefined rules, permit efficiencies, go through my script, find all the women with red pants, etc., or things like that.
Curate me films on a platform.
For example, search algorithm. And then what we call generative AI, which is pattern creation and creating new content based on prompts. And you can all go and take the prompt course. I might do that as well. It might help me with my text for the next presentation. But the two types of technology are not necessarily mutually exclusive. They can support each other. And many of these tools, especially the traditional ones, are already being used, and I think you've described that so eloquently, I won't even go there. I also think as an industry, we're quite good at working with disruptive technology, both in production and also in distribution. So for me, it's really about enabling and empowering. And I don't think they replace the current creative processes. I think what you guys have shown us is things that I can do that I could only dream of in the past. And maybe, yes, the cat has got two tails and we can fix that maybe in post. But I'm very excited about the possibilities. You've talked about pre-production, production, post, marketing and distribution. If anybody's interested in more examples, come and see me, because I've got quite extensive notes also on what we can do. But for me as a lawyer, I kind of, apart from the traditional and the generative AI, I look at AI used in the creative process and AI looked at from a kind of data training or catalog training perspective. And so if you're looking at using AI in your creative or production process, whether it's a new work or you want to work on your catalog, aging, de-aging, voice work, dubbing, syncing, stunts, integration of live action, etc. You go and see the people over here because they're expert, not me. But it's really about consent and consultation. Don't forget to speak to the people that you worked with at the time you created the content, or the people you're working with now as you go forward with your project. It's really important. Depending on the jurisdiction you're in, there can be quite a strong protection of what we call moral rights. For example, here in Europe, that means that you can't just go out and change existing content without the permission of the creators that were performers that were involved. The right to own image, personality right, it's not even copyright, it's just a different field of law that we have to take into.
So we're not necessarily knowing that beautiful person who will come out of the prompt, who that person actually is. But you can train your own models to provide what you need.
But also be aware that, of course, some performers are in a position to actually license their image directly against payment or individual contract terms. So also, if you're working with that kind of performer, creator, keep in mind that they may be promising you things that maybe conflict with other arrangements they've made. So quite a bit of homework to be done. And the other basket is all of this conversation about training on existing content. And it's typically AI developers training on other people's content. And that's, of course, something that's a huge preoccupation for me in my daily life, advising not just producers, as you say, Sten, but the entire creative and business community. But it doesn't mean that you should not think about, would it be interesting for me, if I am the possessor of an interesting catalog, to do training on my own catalog? You should keep in mind that if you're using outside vendors, for example, if you're using your services and you're sending your content to your vendor, have the right provisions in your contract about the data security, the business confidentiality, who owns the output. Quite important. I think there are a couple of people in the beginning of this kind of activity that got a nasty surprise. Really good record keeping. What would we like to get done? What have you done on the basis of what came out of it? Document also the role of humans in the creative process.
Because that's going to guarantee you the copyright.
Well, you may have fantasies about later on being able to have copyright protection of your output, but if it's entirely AI generated for the moment, you won't get copyright protection. We are
as
still...
the US Supreme Court said.
We are still requiring in the international legal system that there's a human component, but it doesn't mean you can't have AI-assisted creativity being copyrightable. So that's why it's really a good idea to record what you've done. So I'm a script writer, and I'm using AI to organize, various forms of information in my work. I keep a record of where I'm using it, to which extent, and I put that in together with my application for registration. So fantasies about replicating famous people's voices, that is an infringement if you don't have their consent. This right of personality also includes people's voice, maybe also part of their personal data. And unlike the copyright system where we have exceptions and you can say, I'm doing a parody or satire or whatever, there are no exceptions to personality rights. So you're in deep doo-doo if you don't clear it beforehand.